Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Emma Brown. I am honored to serve as the Vice President of the Society of European Affairs Professionals, otherwise known as SEAP, sometimes known as the Lobby of Lobbyists. Firstly, I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us here today for what I hope will be a very insightful event reflecting on the current Commission mandate and with 1 year to go, what can still be done before the elections next June. Secondly, I must extend my sincere gratitude to our esteemed member and partner, DeHavilland EU, who joined SEAP last summer and has co-organized this event with us today. And we are immensely grateful for their continued support on all of SEAP's activities. So I personally love an election season. Anyone who's known me a while, or probably in that sweet spot of the changeover year, can attest to that. Looking at the dynamics, assessing what the next mandate will look like, how that will impact the policies already out there, and what direction the next Commission will take us in. We're already seeing predictions come out on which commissioners have a fighting chance of staying on and what the new Parliament will look like. So I'm eager to hear what the panelists believe can still be done. Is a year enough to finalise some of the pending files? What will be left in limbo? And what can we do as public affairs professionals in the next 12 months? This mandate kicked off with a highly ambitious programme under the headline priorities to frame the work from Fit for a Digital Age to promoting a European way of life and the Green Deal. Within these far-reaching priorities, the Commission, alongside its co-legislators, have launched and concluded a huge number of files. Don't worry, I won't be listing any of them, though it would be a feat if I could. I would say that I was and still am very impressed by the ambition and drive around these topics. In particular, I would like to praise the emphasis that has been put on fostering equality within the EU, with the initiatives such as gender equality, LGBTIQ equality, and the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities. Now, as much as I could go down a rabbit hole of where I believe this Commission has succeeded in its ambition and where it might have more work to do, I think you've all come here, like I did, to hear our esteemed panelists discuss many of those things. But to set the scene, what I will say is that I feel personally that the mandate has gone very fast this time. That could be in part due to how tough it has been, unexpectedly so in certain instances. No less than a few months since taking office, we were hit with the pandemic, something none of us saw coming. Notwithstanding the dramatic personal impact of the pandemic, it definitely momentarily threw a spanner in the works for public affairs and the momentum of the policies we were all working on, or many of us were working on. Just as we stopped referring to COVID in every second sentence, the next challenge emerged: Russia's illegal and tragic invasion of Ukraine. Once again, the EU responded swiftly by providing support to Ukraine, putting a spotlight on energy and food security issues. And then Qatargate, which reverberated throughout Brussels, not only damaging the reputation of the EU institutions, but also those practicing public affairs who respect the rules. So I thank you, and we'll leave it there. I will now pass the floor to Christina, who will introduce the panel and moderate the session.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me good? Thank you very, very much. Also, don't be shy. There are still empty spots on the front row. So don't be on the back of the corner. We want to hear you and we want to see you. So I think everyone in this room really identifies with the points raised by Emma. And it's very important because the heart and the dynamic of Brussels is in this room. The public affairs teams that we have in Brussels, they are the driving force of change. And of course, they are a voice that our legislators, our decision makers, they take into account to provide solutions for our daily life, either for citizens or for high level. So I'm Christina Kuremenu. I will be your moderator for today. I represent DeHavilland EU, and I hope you're as excited as me for this event. So for those of you being in Brussels, when the COVID-19 restrictions were lifted, I'm sure you heard, can you still hear me? I was pressing the button for no reason. So I'm sure all of you, when you were in Brussels when the COVID-19 restrictions were lifted, you heard in discussions that things feel like normal, things feel like 2019, finally. But who remembers what happened in 2019 and how much we have changed as a continent, as a union, as a society since this date? And how much has this affected the work that you are doing every day? So during this event, we are going to discuss together with our star speakers about the lessons learned during this mandate, where we should focus our attention, and what we expect to see in 1 year time. So together with me, we have Mr. Michael Wimmer, Director in the European Commission in the Secretariat General. Thank you so much for being here with us. Ms. Natalie Pettiger-Kearney from Freshfields, and Mr. Moritz Korner, German MEP for Renew Europe. So I propose that we start this debate with a couple of introductory remarks from our speakers. So, Mr. Wimmer, would you like to start first?
Well, first of all, many thanks for this invitation. Great to be with you. Also, thanks for the introduction, actually, because many of the points that you raised in this introduction, I can very much agree with. It's probably for me personally the fourth or fifth mandate that I'm witnessing within the Commission, and it has been quite an intense period, and it continues to be a very intense period. It started first of all with a really and truly ambitious orientation, political guidelines that the president has set out, and she was then, or the Commission was then, not even 100 days or so in office that the first crisis hit, and I think you have mentioned that quite a lot. And despite the ambitious program that she had, we maintained course. We have adjusted at that time our work program. We had to respond to these new developments and quite in a massive way. Just to give you an order of magnitude, we have taken, since the crisis hit, some 3,200 decisions which are related to COVID. And we have, in relation to Ukraine, which was kicking in immediately, almost immediately after we were somehow easing our way out of the crisis, we have in that area also had to respond very quickly. We have some close to 400 acts which were somehow specifically linked or related to this. And on top of it, I think one important conclusion that this Commission has drawn is that for all these crises, in particular the key ambitions, the twin transition, the Green Deal, the digital dimension, that these were not a contradiction to responding to those crises, but they were actually a very, very important means to address them, and that actually things like Ukraine have accelerated the urgency rather than put into question the orientations that have been set. So we have, despite these challenges, stayed course. We have a very good implementation rate of our political guidelines. I was checking before coming here. My colleagues have told me we have implemented some 90% already, and the rest is on track. But I mean, these purely and merely numerical issues are not necessarily what's the most representative, and there are different ways of counting. I think the bottom line is a lot of things have happened. I think we have responded very, very quickly and very, very massively. We had to act. We had sometimes to make shortcuts in terms of some procedures. We had to really do things that we weren't used to do. We have never in the health area been involved in vaccine procurement. We have never been, on defense now we are doing things that we didn't do before. On energy, directly being part of organizing purchasing. So a lot of things where we had to learn by doing. But I think there has been a very strong drive, and I think looking back, to the extent that we can look back, because obviously we are still not at the end of that journey, I think Europe looks differently, and I think overall this is a very positive story that we are seeing. Two further points maybe, and I don't want to be too long at the beginning, but two further points. One of the things that were also interesting when the president came in, when this commission came in, was that she established very firmly also this notion of geopolitical commission. And that was something that was maybe difficult at the time, and that people were not necessarily used to, and there has been some kind of sense that there are different responsibilities in the institutions, and certain things are for member states and so on. But I think the subsequent events have then shown quite dramatically how intertwined the internal and the external dimension of our action is, and actually how these things have become inseparable. And actually, I think we can say today with quite a bit of confidence that, I mean, we are a very geopolitical commission, and I think that has been a good development for Europe and for our impact that we have globally, and for the policies that we are taking forward. And then finally, because that's of course important for you as well, I think you have been referred to as the lobby of the lobbyists. I think one important thing was also the engagement with citizens more broadly. I'm not talking in terms of interest representatives, but still, I think we have invested quite a bit in that in several dimensions. I mean, and there's things like defense of democracy, those kind of things, but also, for example, in terms of the consultations that we are doing, we have the OECD has recently ranked us among the best in terms of the consultations that we are running. We had the conference on the future of Europe. We have drawn some lessons from that as well that we are projecting into the future, because I think generally, and I'm sure my colleague from the European Parliament will not contradict me on that, is in particular, I mean, we need to find new ways of engaging with people, and having a possibility also for them to really have a strong sense of being able to influence our policies, also in very concrete and tangible ways. And I think there are several ways and many ways of doing that. Of course, elections are an important one, but as well, there's a whole range of things that we have learned and that we're trying to improve. And I think we have made some good progress here as well. What's still to do, but I think I'm going to stop soon. What's still to do? I mean, there's a lot still also on the table, also in the co-legislative process. Maybe the MEP can talk a little bit about that. That will be an important priority, and then preparing the ground, of course, for a number of things that are going to happen in the future. But all the system or the political play, of course, also needs to play out. There will be political platforms, there will be elections, and all this will be very important in shaping how the future is going to look like. And I guess I stop here, and will be happy to engage with you, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wimmer, and congratulations for trying to fit in 2 minutes all the actions taken by the Commission for this mandate. So, Natalie, would you like to go next?
Thanks very much. And like the other speakers no doubt have remarked, thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here and to sort of be back to what feels like normal, not exactly 2019, as you said, but somewhere in the middle. Freshfields, as you probably know, is a sort of global law firm with offices all over the world. In Brussels, though, I lead our EU regulatory and public affairs team. And we were actually the first law firm in Brussels to set up such a function. And there are many more law firms who now offer a similar thing, which I think is a testament to that sort of business model, and what clients appreciate that we can offer is sort of seamless, integrated legal and public affairs advice in one package. So that's really what we're about. And I think situating a legal problem or a legal proceeding in the policy or the political context is something that clients really value. And I would absolutely pick up on your point about this being a geopolitical commission. I think there has certainly been a change from the last commission to this one, and we're seeing that really bearing out in all sorts of ways. And I've certainly seen clients, but also colleagues around the network really sort of wake up and pay attention to our function. And we've had a real sort of peak, I would say, in our success. And that's also because of what the EU is doing. So, I mean, our team, I would say, really sits at the sort of interface between law, politics and business. And it really is an exciting place to be, not least because the EU is so ambitious, and a lot of its agenda is very international and has a lot of extraterritorial impact. And one thing we've been seeing certainly is more and more interest from non-EU clients in what the EU is doing. And I think that's really a testament to, the influence that the EU has on the international stage, how it is trying to set international standards, and has been very bold and made no secret of that. If you look at things like what's trying to be achieved on artificial intelligence or crypto, these are really, or sustainability, these are really world leading firsts, and there's a lot of cross-pollination between jurisdictions. So clients are more and more thinking about, oh, hey, you know, I really need to pay attention to what's happening in Europe because that can influence where I am. And if I'm globally active, then of course it makes sense that rules align and I can operate sort of as seamlessly as possible throughout jurisdictions. I think also we've been super impressed at the level of ambition, and we would certainly encourage that level of ambition going forward into the next commission. The united front, I think, also on the side of the member states, has been really quite remarkable. The number of tests, whether, you know, we didn't mention Brexit yet, but Brexit, then COVID, then, you know, Ukraine, energy crisis, having, you know, such a united European member state front, I think has been something that's really fantastic. And I would really encourage the Commission to keep that level of ambition, even though it's operating in a, let's say, a geopolitical context, which is not easy and is not getting any easier. And I think there is maybe the real difficulty for the next Commission will be to tread this line between, you know, Europe, you know, boosting European companies, European businesses, the European way of doing things, working with allies, but we don't all do things exactly the same. And there can be sort of irritants there, keeping Europe competitive, but also working with partners and working with allies and upholding our values, but also being open for business and being, you know, allowing globally active businesses and companies to really reap the benefits of the EU single market and to not be protectionist or too inward looking. And that's a huge challenge. And I'm not saying that we have the answers but, you know, that's something I think we're in a bit of a crossroads at the moment. And I would also, something that's been very clear to me from the beginning of this mandate and the change up until now has been, you know, in a certain sense, the EU was in a privileged position at the beginning of this mandate where, especially with the Trump administration, there was a little bit of a policy vacuum in which the EU was able to say, hey, we're going to do these things and set a precedent internationally. And now there is competition on the global stage again, and we have to maneuver around other partners and other ways of doing things, which is maybe more complicated. And I think sustainability is a great example of that, where, you know, the EU is really pushing that agenda. If you look at sustainable finance, you know, there's a real backlash in other places. But it's great that others are coming to the table, but it's maybe not as easy for the Commission to, you know, strike out there and plant a flag in certain areas that it maybe seemed at the beginning of this mandate. So I think we are going into a bit of a crossroads that we'll have to navigate carefully. European competitiveness, European businesses, European interest, strategic autonomy, but, you know, we're a free market and we're open for business, and we want companies to come here and to operate and really thrive and grow and make the most of the opportunities here. So I think those will probably be my first reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Mr. Corner, do you want to go next?
Yes, and also from my side, thank you very much for inviting me and for having this discussion. I think a lot of everything has been summarized now after my previous speakers, but I want to touch upon one aspect that is, I think, not mentioned yet. Of course, this mandate was there were lots of crises we managed, and sometimes I think COVID was actually the most difficult one, because it was, as a policymaker or as a lawmaker, it was really difficult because you could not meet, and it was so. I remember sitting in complete empty Brussels in the council building, only people who were in the trilogue and with masks and like big rooms and everything. So it was so difficult to mingle, to get together, to exchange ideas. So this was really, I think, the biggest challenge. But we had lots of challenges. You mentioned them in this mandate, and still the Commission and also the other institutions managed to push them through the digital agenda, the Green Deal, and all of this. But I will look now a little bit on, you know, out of this Brussels thinking, because here in the Parliament we know all of this crisis, we know all the ambitions and so on. But when you look today on the polls, if the election was today, the pro-European parties would lose. The right-wing parties would gain, the left would also gain seats. So the majority, the von der Leyen majority, or if you, the pro-European groups will, at the Greens, is getting smaller and smaller. And of course, there's still 1 year to the election, and we know that, of course, having polls on the European level is always difficult and so on. So, of course, there's some changes maybe to that, but I think what we have to look into is how do we, and you touched a little bit on it already, how do we actually get European citizens on board? How do we make sure that they see that we struggle with all these crises, that Europe is actually protecting them against these crises, and that Europe is actually the solution for the big transformations in digital and in the Green Deal and everything. And I'm not sure if we actually achieved that. And that's where I would also say I'm not completely happy with the conference of the future of Europe, because actually we did a huge thing there. Then COVID came, and to be honest, nothing really happened after the conference of the future of Europe. And I think people are still looking. If you're in the district, if I'm back in Germany, they are still ask me, what's actually, what the European Union doing? I don't understand what's happening there and so on. So sometimes we have to think about what is actually the view of the citizens of the European Union and what's the role. And of course, we also have to see that we lost member states. We lost member states. Not with Brexit only, but we have a not democratic member state in the European Union. The European Parliament goes as far as to say Hungary is not a democracy anymore. And we have this huge battle with rule of law, Poland. We see difficulties also, Meloni government in Italy, spyware scandal in Greece. So actually, I think we have to, with all our ambition and with all what we want to achieve for the European Union, we have to sometimes think, how do we actually make this happen in a European democracy? And I think this is the biggest challenge, 1 year to go to the polls, to really get citizens, get voters on board for our European democracy and for our European future.
Mr. Corner, a lot of food for thought, of course, for everything that you said. So let's move on to our panel discussion. So as Mr. Wimmer mentioned, the European Commission has tabled a variety of proposals, and according to numbers from the European Parliament Research Service, the European Commission during those 5 years, they have tabled around 600 initiatives. A couple of them still in progress, some of them they're close, some of them they're under completion. So there's a route. Mr. Wimmer, would you say that exactly because of all those geopolitical crises that we have to face and different challenges, the European Commission changed something in the prioritization of the files that they were working on? Meaning, did some initiatives went to the driver's seat, although some others they went to the back seat? What do you think? What's your opinion on that?
Well, thanks for the questions. A little bit, as I said before, I think in terms of the broad direction, the Commission concluded relatively quickly that these crises do not change the fundamental direction in which we should be going, but at the contrary, that certain things should be rather accelerated. Now, of course, in very practical terms, there had to be a degree of reprioritization in terms of certain things needed to be extremely quick, needed to be sped up. And what we have done, for example, when the COVID crisis hit, we have changed our work program that we had initially provided for in order to really focus on the urgencies. And of course, we have done certain things that were in no work program at all, and that includes big things. I mean, if you take things like Next Generation EU, that was something that we have done in a couple of weeks, actually, and this was a very, very ambitious, not just in money terms. I mean, we have now at our disposal. If you take the budget and the Next Generation EU, we have 2 trillion, which go into our economy, but which go importantly also not just in the things that we've been doing before, but in the new stuff. We wanted to improve things. I think in the US it's called Build Back Better. They go into the Green Deal. 30% overall go into the Green Deal. We have a lot of money going into the digital transition. So these things were not necessarily planned. They were done very, very quickly, but they were important amplifiers for what we have been doing. In terms of the numbers that you mentioned, that's always there are always different ways of counting. I think the EP research service is counting a little bit differently because they count from the moment when an initiative is taken up actually in the legislative process. But I mean, the bottom line is that both our own analysis and they are, I think, extremely positive about the things that we have delivered based on what we have committed. So we have made some adjustments, we have reprioritized, we have accelerated certain things, but we have not changed the overall direction.
Absolutely. And of course, no one can claim that the European Commission has not worked very, very hard during this term. To this regard, Mr. Corner, during those months, especially after COVID and with the current crisis that they have been taking place in the EU, the European Parliament has raised concerns that they want to be more implicated in the process, that there were occasions that the European Parliament has been dodged in the co-legislation process and they wanted a more active role. What do you think on that? What's your opinion with this statement?
I think that's the position of the European Parliament, and it's true. We had some urgency processes, and I think the European Parliament showed throughout all these crises that it's able to work on high speed if it's necessary. Of course, sometimes you can think about processes in the European Parliament, especially when we need a few months to decide which committee is actually in charge and so on. So that the Parliament still has, I think, also potential to improve. But touching on what I just said, trying to involve citizens to in this European decision making, it makes sense to involve the institution that is directly elected by the citizens. So, of course, we need a stronger role of the European Parliament, and that is actually something that the Parliament itself has to improve its working methods to be even faster on some issues. But I think we need that stronger role of the European Parliament.
Thank you. Natalie, so you have been working with various clients that they have been recipients of the Legal Acts, they are working on it. So from your experience, from the things that you have observed, how easy was for stakeholders during this period to share their views with the co-legislator, with the European Commission, to shape the policy, to provide their feedback, to bring more solutions on the table?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's certainly been a challenge in terms of the sheer volume of legislation and overlapping legislation, or legislation where it might be difficult to see how they interact. So I think just keeping on top of it before you even get to a position which you may want to then speak to somebody about, but just getting a good grip on, what is affecting a particular client or your business has been quite a challenge. There have been concurrent pieces of legislation where, I would say maybe, if you looked at DORA, Digital Operational Resilience, but you also have NIS running in parallel, or the AI Act and Consumer Credit Directive, there's lots of different directions you need to look in, and that multiplies the number of stakeholders involved. So that's definitely been more of a challenge this time around than I would say last time around. Also because of the increasing horizontality of issues. So obviously, there's overlaps between sectors and industry and policy areas, so there's a lot of overlapping, I would say. That's been quite a challenge to work through. the sheer volume as well. But I think generally the interaction has been good. I mean, COVID, we were all sort of scratching our head for a couple of weeks thinking, oh, how is this going to work? But maybe, you know, less traveling, not having to move around so much for in-person meetings, people not being away at conferences and things. For some policymakers, I think it was actually easier to have access, and I think the access has always been quite good. I think the institutions have also been quite creative in the ways in which they have sought feedback. I mean, on the Commission side, I mean, something that we have found great, and I would really encourage going forward in the next mandate, for example, is what you did on digital finance, where you had these stakeholder outreach sessions, which ran over, you know, a number of weeks on different topics, and the attendance at those was incredible, and the opportunities to interact directly with, you know, Commission staff on the panel was really impressive. And we've seen that as well on DMA, you know, these implementation workshops for the Digital Markets Act. So I think that's been a really useful way of working together. So I think it's been at sometimes challenging. It's been harder to see the big picture and understand how initiatives interact with each other and interrelate, and you have to look in a lot of different directions simultaneously. There's definitely more stakeholders involved than before. In the Parliament, I mean, on a lot of these horizontal files, you have multiple committees, there's a lead committee, but that's something we've seen more and more of. And I've mentioned AI and DMA. I think those are absolutely perfect examples of that, where, you know, depending on the specific angle of the file, you might need to be dealing with the jury committee or the Libe committee or IMCO. So that really is quite a challenge. Qatar situation hasn't helped. I think there is more reticence now on the part of some to maybe engage with business, but again, I think that sort of depends on the individuals involved. But I would say no, access over, we found the door has always been open and you know, available for constructive feedback. Of course, we miss this human touch, especially when you don't necessarily see eye to eye on things. I think that helps to have that, you know, in-person moment in the room together, or opportunity to talk in the sidelines of things. Those sort of conversations, in the margins can be very helpful. And I think the institutions also suffered that as well. You know, having those informal moments together can really be just as important as the formal communications. But overall, I think there have been multiple channels and ways of becoming active in the process, and some of them quite new as a result of COVID. And I hope that they stick around. Because those have been incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. So during this term, it's true that a lot of change took place, a lot of discussions on how the EU institutions, they can become better, and how crises they can be seized to make ourselves better in the EU. So, Mr. Corner, we saw, for example, with the recent case with the Qatar Gate and with the new transparency reform in the European Parliament, that we go towards this route to change. What's your opinion on that? Do you think that, for example, the way that public affairs teams, they engage with the European Parliament is going to change? Do you foresee, have you seen any change in trends? From your side, how do you feel that it's better for public affairs professionals to engage with you?
So let's be very clear, Qatar Gate was a criminal act. It was already criminal by law what they did. They took money to, and it's, you know, I'm in favor of having more transparency, especially now we're talking about like publishing even more lobby meetings and so on. I do that already. You know, if you want to meet me, everything will be on my website. It's pretty easy. You know, it's a very easy system. My assistant is, you know, making an appointment, putting it into the system. No problem. I don't have a big problem with that, and we can have even more transparency on that. But that will not fundamentally change the fact that if somebody is willing to take 600,000 euros in cash, he might not put that into a transparency register. So I think we of course there has to be more transparent lobbying. But guys, let's be very clear here. I think the transparency of European lobbying is already very high compared to other national parliaments or national systems. Of course, there's always room for improvement. I'm also not against the this ethics body that is looking on these issues. But I don't think that everybody that is doing the normal lobbying or the normal interest representation in Brussels has to change much, because I think there's not so much bad or criminal stuff happening, and that actually they were caught and that they are behind bars shows actually that our investigation is functioning. So I think, of course, we have to look for improvement. Of course, we have to also deliver now, especially in the European Parliament, because it lost a lot of trust with the European citizens. But I don't think that we find new rules that will prevent that somebody who's willing to take so much cash criminally, that we can stop it from happening with transparency rules or something.
Thank you, Mr. Corner. And Mr. Wimmer, the next question is for you, but I'm pretty sure you have faced it recently. So 4 words. EU, who is who? I think the reactions in the room, they talk more than the question itself. So it's true that in Brussels we saw in the EU who is who. The contact details of officials under management level have been removed on the grounds of data privacy and protection from external pressure. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I haven't actually discussed it a lot because I don't actually think that it is a very big deal. What we have done is essentially we have aligned our practice with the practice of other institutions. I really don't understand why. I know that we've been criticized. I've read your press release on this one, but I really don't understand why it is an issue. Obviously, we want to be accessible, we want to be transparent, but we want to be accessible and transparent for everyone according to the rules. We have 2 concerns or 2 considerations that have led us to do that alignment. One was an issue of indeed data protection. We have, in general, also when you have access to document requests, for example, we have a rule that says that you have management functions. Their names appear; they are not blacked out. They have a representative function, and then you have people below the management level who you protect, who are protected by these privacy considerations. And secondly, and that is something that I would invite you not to underestimate. There are some people, there are some colleagues who are working in certain areas where things are sometimes getting very, very difficult, and where you have security issues linked to rule of law issues, linked to a number of things where I think our duty of care required that. And I absolutely don't see that this is in any way a limitation, because the access should take place via the official channels. There will always be, all our services are contactable. We have also our consultation system. We have, everyone remains available and accessible. And if there is a subsequent contact or whatever that is delegated or whatever, very fine, and there is no impediment there. So I don't see at all why that would be an issue, and why it's even worth discussing. We have aligned our practice to an existing practice in the other institutions, and we've done so for data protection and for security reasons.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wimmer. I mean, it's always good to have, a path for you as well to justify and clarify the decisions taken by the European Commission. For sure, the outreach and engagement is an important part of advocacy work in Brussels. And Natalie, I don't know if you would like to comment, or, for example, bring your view, your perspective, from Freshfield's clients about this new phenomenon that we have, for example, with the who is who, that for the time being is not available, the contact details of more junior staff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to labor the point, and I think it's been made very well by SEAP and others. But I do think it has historically, up until now, been a hugely valuable valuable resource, also not to overburden certain individuals. I think it's come as a bit of a surprise to certain heads of units who suddenly find their telephones are ringing off the hook, and they're having to deal with queries that could easily be dealt with on sort of small, sometimes it's a small organizational point, maybe around a meeting or just a clarification point from an ongoing conversation. It's just easier to and more efficient to pick it up by the telephone. I mean, for the European Parliament, it's all very clear. You know, your email address and telephone numbers and the names of your assistants are all publicly available. So yeah, I do think it changes things, and I think it was done. It was done quite suddenly, so I think there was no. I think that's also what maybe took people by surprise, was that it just sort of happened, and then people picked up on it almost by accident. It was quite surprising. So I think from that point of view, maybe I think it could have been expected, the reaction to it. I don't think it could have been that surprising how people rely on it and how they feel about it, and with a whole transparency discussion going on. That actually it is a very efficient way, and it has worked very well in the past. And I do think it is sorely missed by those of us in this business. So we would definitely like it returned if possible. Also not to overburden certain people. I mean, also just in terms of seeing things like. It's not necessarily just about contacting people, but also trying to get a grip on how things are organized. I mean, for example, looking at how the DMA units in Comp and Connect are building up in terms of resources. I think it's a very useful thing to be able to see, okay, there were 4 people in that department a few months ago. Now they're really, you know, they have a really serious team. They've got this number of people. You know, that also gives you information and signals about how the institutions are operating. So I do think there was a significant amount of value there. And the fact that it was sort of taken offline in the way in which it was done was yeah, unfortunate, and I would just say, you know, disappointing. But I think you guys have made all the salient points already. So yeah.
Thank you, Natalie. So the next question is addressed to all of our speakers. I'm going to start with Mr. Corner. So let's say right now that you have a magic fortune ball. Which key legislative priorities do you foresee for the next term? Which policy files you would say that we expect to see, you know, in 1 year's time, or maybe a follow-up of the existing ones?
That's not what the European Parliament does. Normally we wait for the Commission because we don't have the initiative for now. I think, but I think we will still need to tackle the geopolitical dimension. We will still deal with the Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We might deal with even more aggression from China towards Taiwan, or with a more stronger geopolitical situation. I think in some areas the European Commission already reacted, and we will see if we might be able to finish this already in this term. But I expect that there might be the need. We more or less finished the digital things. So I think that we might finish the AI Act soon. We actually, that was very successful with the Green Deal. I don't know what's up with the EPP. Let's see if we finish the agenda there. But I think the geopolitical situation, in a wider sense, they're not only looking on Russia. That is really where we will see some files where we might see a stronger role of Europe, of the European Union. Just look at India, for example. That is now the biggest country in the world, or with the largest population. We might see also the trade we're in trade talks again. So I think there might be the biggest challenges in the next mandate.
Thank you. Natalie, do you want to go next?
Sure. I hope that we will have some time to reflect before we launch into more initiatives, of course, which will come, no doubt. But I think in terms of, I mentioned it before, but the sheer volume of legislation that's been put on the table and recently agreed, there must absolutely be a period of stock taking, implementation, seeing how all the different parts fit together. And even for rather sophisticated clients who have our help and other people helping them to try and understand the landscape here in the legislative picture. I mean, if you take the digital space, I think it's still quite unclear for certain businesses, how does the Data Governance Act and the Data Act and the DMA and AI all fit and work together. And it makes me think my sort of baptism by fire into public affairs was after the financial crisis on all the financial legislation. And it sort of reminds me a little bit about what happened at that moment, that, there was this enormous output of rules. And then there was a bit of a moment when everybody realized, hang on a minute, we actually need to coordinate this, and we need supervisory convergence and cooperation, and maybe we need to create supervisory bodies. And I think you see some of that in the legislation already, like AI, there's provision in there for some sort of coordinating body. We have something on consumer questions as well. DMA, there is some cooperation things in there between Commission and member states. But I think in terms of clear enforcement, implementation, there will have to be a reflection, especially I think in the digital space, about how does that all work, and do we need more Europe there actually to be able to look across all of the different member states and see if it's working properly. So I hope there will be that for starters, and we will have some novel things to work through also in terms of just in the institutions. I mean, DG Comp and DG Connect are going to be working a lot more closely together on DMA, for example. Let's see how that goes. Or I think the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive is a really interesting one, where there's a big impact on financial sector, but it's DG Justice in the lead. And how will that play out? So again, this horizontality of issues and collaboration across services. So, on the institutional level, but then also, of course, on the implementation side as well, fundamental. There are going to be lots of reviews, I think, and review clauses where, legislation has to be looked at. GDPR is going to be reviewed. That's going to be a really big one. But there are new things also on the horizon, things like metaverse, where clients are starting to think, where might the EU institutions go on that one. Own resources funding, where I saw, the Parliament did a resolution on that recently. I think the need for funding the recovery and getting out of these multiple crises we've seen, that conversation isn't over yet. And also on the competition policy as well. Where are we headed? We the floodgates seem to be open on state aid, subsidies. We have all this massive intervention. Where is that going to go in the next Commission? Is that really here to stay? Is this going to be the new normal, or is this just a reaction to the very particular circumstances in which we are in? So yeah, a combination of things. Definitely reviews on the table. We know that they're going to happen, new elements that will, things are developing all the time. And we just finished crypto asset legislation, but we already know there's about 4, 5, 6, 7 things that we didn't actually get to the first time around, and the Commission will have to probably look at again. But I do hope that there will be a time for bedding down of what we already have before we think about what might come next.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Wimmer, what do you think?
Well, it's more difficult than you might think for a Commission official to make a statement about the future agenda, because there is a political process. There will be elections, and these elements will determine and shape, of course, what the priorities of the future will be. Now, there are, of course, a number of topics which we think are relevant. And one interesting thing there is that with the start of this Commission, we have for the first time in a really serious way done some foresight work. I mean, we have always done foresight, But for the first time under this mandate, we have made a link between that work and the policy. And we have tried to integrate that into our better regulation agenda and so on. And if you look at what our strategic foresight reports, for example, the topics that they revolve around, the first one was about resilience. We had strategic autonomy. We had things like the connections between the digital and the green transition, which was not about either of them, but rather about how they interact and how they influence each other, because there are tensions and reinforcements among those elements. We will be looking this year about the economic and social implications of these aspects, because you can only achieve change if you take people with you, and if you manage to take them together. There are things, of course, that are also very, very prominent now in the discussion. Things like, and it's a bit linked to what you said. I mean, on competitiveness and on making sure that I wouldn't necessarily put it in the terms that you mentioned, but there is a certain awareness about the fact that we need to look at the level of reporting requirements, the level of, I mean, our whole better regulation system, the burden reduction. I think a lot of things have been done here already under the Commission. Things like one in, one out were a complete taboo previously, and I think there is really an investment there, and now some recent ambitions that have been formulated also are very, very important and meaningful, and I guess that they will be relevant as well. So these topics, and of course some of the things that are currently on the table will remain very, very important. Now, of course, you're right that a lot of things have been done, and I mean, something like Fit for 55 is something that is really not only a lot, but also very integrated and very horizontal. And maybe I can speak here a little bit to what you said. I mean, one of the changes that I also see in terms of how we work is there are no silos anymore in the Commission as there used to be previously. I mean, what we put on the table today is, except if you have something that's extremely specific, is very integrated, very cross-cutting across services, and very deliberate also in terms of the programming and how services work together. So there's a lot of change for us as well, and that means, however, in general, better integrated, better interacting acts, and I think that will remain an important investment. But I mean, I have no crystal ball in terms of what the political dynamics will be. I may have some theories as a citizen, but not for me as an official to comment on that.
Thank you, and we do understand. So I'm going to ask 2 last questions from me, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions from the audience. So get ready, prepare your questions. So, Mr. Corner, the timing of this event couldn't be better since we have an official date for the next EU elections. So how strong does Renew Europe feel for the next elections, taking into account all the work done during this mandate?
Of course, we feel very strong. I think we have a date. So the European Parliament, I already told you earlier, I think there's a few different phases. In the first phase, after you get elected, there's nothing to do except electing the European Commission, and then lots of people do own initiative reports and send around lots of letters. Then the Commission is starting to send out all the initiatives, and then it's getting very busy. This time we also had the problems with the difficulties with COVID, and now we're in a phase where we still have lots to do, lots on the table. But of course, people look forward now to the campaigns. That is ongoing, of course. Now the preparations are underway. We have the ALDE Council, the ALDE Congress in Stockholm at the weekend. So of course, we want to be stronger. We are the third largest group. There is no majority, and it seems to be, of course, when we look at the polls, there can be changes, but it seems to be that in also next mandate, there's no majority without Renew Europe, and we were the kingmaker in the center, and we want to stay in that position and even gain some ground. And of course, that will be hard work now, 1 year to go. And the campaign, I think, might even start earlier than in previous times. I have the feeling that the European elections this time can even be more influential, more important, especially in my state in Germany. I think it will be 1 year before the German Bundestag elections, so it will have a huge impact on the national political discussion as well. So I think we will see a stronger campaign, and I hope that, of course, Renew Europe is going to renew Europe even stronger, more strongly.
That can be a great motto for a campaign as well. So Natalie, let's say on your behalf, since you have been in contact with a lot of clients, engaging in advocacy and representing the public affairs teams, what recommendations would you give, for example, the European Commission to the European Parliament on how to better engage with public affairs team? More proactivity, more consultations to be issued, more working groups? What would you think?
Thanks. I think I've touched on some of these before. I think that, you know, the mechanisms that do exist are very good, and you mentioned the transparency requirements, which are fundamental, which I think we feel are fit for purpose. There will always be people who play outside of the rules, but you know, that happens. I think the reticence maybe of some political groups in the European Parliament to engage with business is sort of historical and understandable from some, you know, more ideological points of view, but is sometimes a little bit disappointing. But I think that's not something that you can solve with a magic wand. But the complexity of how the work is done does make it more difficult. So I don't think there necessarily needs to be new or novel channels of interaction or ways of working together, but certainly at the beginning of this mandate, with, again, I've said this a lot, the horizontality of issues, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the current committee structure, for example, is just really unwieldy. And you mentioned it as well, you know, the time that it takes to assign things when we are supposed to be leading the way internationally on things like AI or platform regulation, that it does take 6 months sometimes or more to get things allocated in committee is a real pity, because it, you know, it does lead to some loss of credibility, and then you end up with something that's just really difficult to work with and really difficult to engage with. So there's a big ask if that can be looked at, and I would be very interested to know if there are you know, moves in that direction, if that is something that's being considered, because I think it's only going to become more acute as things go on and in the next mandate. And for the Commission, I've said it already, I think the opportunities given to stakeholders are many and very well appreciated, and certainly the stakeholder dialogues, I think those are really great tools. I mentioned a couple of those that we've had already in this mandate. So the availability of the services as well, I would really commend, and we've always found the door open when we've needed it. The better regulation things, I mean, yeah, some, I guess, are more useful than others. Clients always ask us, what about these like post-publication consultations? Like, should we do anything there? And will it change anything? And we say, no, it won't really change anything at this stage. But, you know, it's a useful tool if you're just trying to get your position together, and whatever you put into that consultation is probably going to be useful for you in your advocacy going forward. So yeah, it can be a good moment to sort of reflect on what your position actually is, but whether some of those are more, I don't know, sort of box ticking exercises, but certainly the pre-legislative opportunities, I think, are many and very well appreciated. So I think those would be my comments there. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. So I'm going to stop exercising my privilege of moderator right now and open the floor to questions to our audience. As a housekeeping rule, if you have a question, please state your name, the association you represent, and the speaker that you target with your question, if not to all speakers. So any questions from the audience? Don't be shy. You have the chance 1 year before the elections. Yes, I see a lady there in the background.
Thank you. Gail Orton with Clifford Chance, another law firm based in Brussels. Mario Monti had an interesting piece in the Financial Times this morning lamenting the lack of attention being paid to the single market. I think I second everything that you've said, Natalie, about the amount of legislation that's being put out and proposed and how it is groundbreaking and world leading. And there's absolutely no doubt that clients around the world are looking at what the EU does. But a slightly provocative question, is it at the expense of policing what's going on in our own backyard? And is that something that perhaps the next Commission should focus on, as you said, Natalie, bedding down, but also making sure that what's on the statute book is properly implemented and properly applied? And do you need more resources in order to do that? Thank you.
So who would like to take this question? Maybe Mr. Corner?
I had the slight feeling that it was a little bit more directed to the Commission, but I can say something on that. I think we really need to work on enforcement. I think actually that this is also a weakness of the European Parliament, that we're not looking, that we are working, we're really good in doing legislation now, I think, but like MEPs are a little bit like, you know, we're looking around for the files that are there to be a shadow or to be a rapporteur, and then we finish it and then we look for the next files. And sometimes I think we miss, you know, looking what is actually happening, what is the enforcement and so on. One example, today we had Helen Dixon, the head of the Irish DPC, the Data Protection Authority. You know, they slapped yesterday Meta with 1.2 billion euros, so that's a huge fine. And that's also, of course, the big discussion on EU-US data transfers and so on and so on. It's not a big file. The GDPR is done. We know that we have new discussions there, you know, but we should look closer on also enforcement, what's really happening, what is functioning. That's also not only looking at the Commission, but also looking at the Parliament as a legislator and, of course, the directly elected institution. I want to touch it, if I may, shortly on what you raised on the. So we are actually, as I think, we don't like the process as much as you don't like it, because first of all, we a little bit in defense of the Parliament. It takes some time until everything is translated in every language, and we need that to start a process. So this takes some time, but of course we take, you know, the political. Trying to find which committee is responsible and so on takes a lot of time too. And I'm personally against this different committees in charge, because it's a huge mess normally. It's really difficult to have two shadows from your group. You have to coordinate and so on and so on. It's so much easier to do a file where you have one committee in charge, where you might have opinions and so on. By the way, that they are not so important. Don't work on opinions at all. But you know, that is so much easier, I think, for the lawmakers too. So for you, of course, and there are discussions. I had yesterday. I spoke to Metsola, and there are discussions in the Parliament also to change this. But of course, you know, everybody is in favor of changing it until a very huge file is not going to your committee. So that's the difficulty here.
Well, no, I'm also very happy to talk about the single market because I very much, I mean, I haven't read the Monti piece, but it's clearly a cornerstone of our whole system, and many of the things that we are doing are related to the single market. Have a single market legal base, as you're working for a law firm. And they are precisely to make things easier for businesses, citizens, and to replace 27 rules by one. I agree with you that there is an important enforcement dimension. In different areas. I mean, competition enforcement is also single market enforcement. Our tax reforms are also single market, but also infringements and so on. So I agree with you. It's a very important dimension. I agree that sometimes it's politically less visible, and that therefore there are these kind of challenges that you're referring to. But I think there's a very big recognition that this is one key part of our strength, and a key part of why we are strong as Europe, because we have this one system, because it is the single market and our regulatory power that creates and generates the Brussels effect, which I think is very important also in a global geopolitical perspective. And I think I very much agree with you what you said also at the beginning, that we will have to look at things from that perspective, and we do have some good successes where we have been setting the standards, and I think that's rather important. So completely agree on that.
Thanks. No, I wanted to pick up on what you said on enforcement, because I agree with you, but I think the Parliament actually has been you do have some good tools, and maybe they can be used more. And I'll go to my sort of happy place, which is financial services, and I think there, Econ is unbelievably good at calling in the ECB, the European supervisory authorities. Tell us what you're doing. We want to quiz you on really into the detail type stuff. And I think the accountability of some of these agencies that are doing the enforcement is really important. And you mentioned Helen Dixon today, and that's a good example of that. But also with the DMA, we have a sort of MEP parliamentary implementation group. Maybe that could be a blueprint going forward. I'm not sure exactly what they discussed there, and the MEPs give a very sort of short update in committee about what they've been discussing. But I think that provides a tool that we've started to see, and we were very intrigued to see that was set up, because the political stakes there are, of course, very high. But maybe there are things like that can be built on.
May I shortly touch upon it? Because I have another example that's actually my main work in this term was the rule of law conditionality. We could have said, we achieved the rule of law conditionality, the law is there, agreement with the council in December 2020. Okay, that's it, thank you. But we pushed the commission on, and I bet you didn't like it so much. We pushed and pressured and even went to court and to make it finally happen, that in the end, and we knew that council was not very keen to implement it in the end, but in the end we have managed to achieve the rule of law conditionality, thanks also to the commission, and I think in the end the commission president that stick to a very clear line on Hungary. But that was, we were finished with the lawmaking, but we were, trying to enforce it. And I think that's something we have to look at closer, and there might be good examples. Sometimes there are good examples, but generally I think the European Parliament could be better in looking actually what did we achieve with the legislation, where did we achieve things that are not enforced, and my feeling is also with a inquiry, if we look at the inquiry committees, for example, in the European Parliament, they did a huge work. Like, for the example, I'm in the Pegasus committee. We did a huge amount of work, but our powers are pretty limited. So I think, there's room for improvement to really enforce, to question, to improve European legislation and really make a difference also in the life of our citizens.
Thank you. Do I have another question from the audience? Perfect. Okay, so the gentleman here.
Hello, good evening. My name is Jürgen Nork. I'm Managing Director of Plux Consulting. I have a question for Mr. Körner. Looking forward to the next EU elections. Well, one buzzword is the Spitzenkandidaten processes. Do you think it is dead? And if so, do you think it will have an impact on the voter turnout or the voter preferences? Because last time voters did not get what they voted for, since Mrs. von der Leyen was not a Spitzenkandidat. Thanks.
I was a little bit waiting for that question. I think we will see. So I think Ms. von der Leyen will be Spitzenkandidat. And that is, of course, in the hand of the voters. If she has a good election result in the end, the EPP has a strong election result and so on, and we will see the majorities after the election. but it might be the case that actually on the second, in a second election, she's elected as Spitzenkandidat and Commission President, and that would, or that might help the process in the end. I think we will see Spitzenkandidaten from the other political groups. We hear already Greens are going into that direction. Pretty obvious. Social Democrats, it's not so clear what they are doing. Renew is always very difficult, so there might be more candidates or something. It's not very clear, but I think we will see something like Spitzenkandidaten or different candidates in the groups, and I think that's a very important process. I would like to even see it strengthened via the new electoral law with a part of the mandates elected by the transnational lists. That is the new proposal by the parliament. Of course, it's a hard way to go with a council, but I think that would institutionalize the process even further, and I think it's important to have that. And one argument on, I think even if the Spitzenkandidaten process last time was not successful, that we had this ambition in the European Commission's program was also maybe due to the fact that Mrs. von der Leyen had to really campaign very hard in the European Parliament to gain the support of the political groups. And I think she was trying very hard, for example, to gain support of the Social Democrats and of the Greens, which might have reflected in Green Deal or ambitious programs there. So the role of the European Parliament and the role of the European elections in this process, and the Commission just said it, the ambition and the guidelines are given by the new Commission, and that's of course in reflection of the campaign. That is important, and the process, I think, is important to strengthen this democratic process, and that's why I'm in favor. I would like to see it strengthened to the transnationalists, and I think we will see it again this time.
Thank you very much. So I don't know if someone wants to comment on the last question. If not, everything is fine. So thank you so much for your questions. If you still have, please keep them and address them to our speakers during the networking event. To close this session and liberate our speakers for their amazing input tonight, maybe as a closing and optimistic statement with, let's say, 2 words, how would you see the next step? For example, reskill Europe, rethink Europe. For you, Mr. Corner. Yes. Renew Europe. For you, Mr. Wimmer?
I'm not sure I can make a prediction. Actually, I think I identified some topics which I believe will be relevant. I'm not sure I'm able to capture a buzzword like that.
I mean, the ones that come to mind, I think, are actually already pretty representative of this one. I was thinking reboot, re-energize, but I think we've done all that this last mandate. So it's going a step beyond renew as well. I think we're pretty fresh. So no, I have to think about it. I need to put my comms hat on.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for your attention. So Emma, would you like to take the floor? And maybe you start with a word for the next time.
I won't be trying a word. Thank you to the panelists and the discussion. I think there was a resounding agreement that plenty had been achieved, done, that we were very busy in terms of public affairs professionals this mandate, and probably will continue to be until next June, or at least the last plenary in May. I was very pleased to hear mention of transparency and access. Obviously, we touched on the EU who's who, all things that SEAP are very active and involved in supporting all the institutions on. I liked what was said about stock taking and review. I think obviously not only in terms of the policy, but also the structures, the horizontal, the structure in the European Parliament. There's been a lot of political tug of wars that have slowed down the momentum or stopped the momentum in certain points. I'm not sure there is a kind of golden ticket to solve that, as you pointed out. But it is something that I see potential changes, as there always are at the start of each mandate. Normally we look to the Commission to see which units go where, but I think there may be more changes in the European Parliament. It sounds like we'll be busy in next mandate if everything that was said on this on the stage comes to fruition, or at least there is that ambition that is continued forward from this mandate. So I think we'll all still have a job to do. And yeah, thank you everybody who came. I invite you now to enjoy the nibbles and drinks and to continue the discussion with the panelists and everybody else in the audience. So thank you.